Ethan Maxwell built his fortune in the renewable energy sector, anticipating the global shift towards sustainability decades before it became mainstream. At 49, he controlled one of the largest solar energy companies in Latin America, with projects spanning 12 countries, a client roster that included governments, multinational corporations, and remote rural communities. Finally, gaining access to clean, reliable electricity, his entrepreneurial vision transformed not just barren lands into solar farms powering entire cities, but most importantly, it democratized access to clean energy, creating thousands of dignified jobs in regions historically neglected by economic development. Ethan wasn't just a profit-driven businessman. He understood deeply that energy represented freedom, opportunity, and above all, dignity for communities that had lived for generations in literal and figurative darkness. Ethan's extraordinary success wasn't the result of family inheritance, business luck, or any kind of initial socio-economic advantage. The son of a small-town auto mechanic and an elementary school teacher who dedicated nights and weekends to tutoring to supplement their family income. He studied electrical engineering on a partial scholarship earned through exceptional grades and relentless hard work throughout high school. Throughout college, Ethan worked in auto repair shops, installed residential solar panels with his own, and dedicated weekends to small electrical projects to pay for study materials and basic living expenses. He boldly founded his first company at 26 in a leased garage, using used equipment purchased with personal loans he painstakingly repaid after nearly 5 years of rigorous savings and tireless work. Ethan's meteoric entrepreneurial trajectory was characterized by extremely calculated risks, constant innovation, and above all, an almost visionary ability to anticipate market trends before the competition. When solar energy was still largely considered expensive, impractical, and suitable only for very specific applications, he developed revolutionary proprietary technologies that reduced installation and maintenance costs while significantly improving energy efficiency and system durability. His multiple technological patents literally revolutionized the global solar industry, and his company quickly became an international benchmark in the development of sustainable energy solutions specifically adapted for developing nations and resource-limited communities. Ethan proved it was possible to be profitable and socially responsible simultaneously, creating business models that benefited both investors and local communities. However, as often happens with high-level entrepreneurs, the personal price of this extraordinary business success was considerable and painful. His first marriage ended amicably but inevitably when the company was undergoing a critical phase of international expansion, a period during which Ethan simply couldn't balance the relentless demands of international meetings, constant travel, and urgent strategic decisions with the basic emotional needs of a close and committed relationship. When Ethan met Isabella 10 years ago, during a more stable phase of his company, he was genuinely determined not to repeat the same mistakes that had cost him his first marriage. However, he quickly discovered that balancing a constantly growing global company with a fulfilling personal life and meaningful relationships was a complex challenge that even his proven expertise in energy efficiency optimization couldn't solve completely. Isabella was unlike anyone Ethan had met in business or social circles. A human rights lawyer specializing in environmental justice, she worked for prestigious international organizations on legally complex cases involving universal access to clean water, the protection of the fundamental rights of indigenous communities, and, above all, advocacy for democratic and equitable access to clean energy in poor and historically marginalized regions. They met during an international conference on sustainability and social justice, where Isabella was presenting an extremely important legal case against an oil multinational that had deliberately contaminated groundwater reserves in an Amazon community, affecting thousands of families who relied exclusively on these resources for basic survival. What immediately attracted Ethan to Isabella wasn't just her impressive intelligence, her evident passion for social justice, or her internationally recognized legal competence, but mainly her unique ability to identify and articulate the deep connections between technological development and real human impact. Connections he sometimes lost sight of when completely absorbed in complex financial spreadsheets, international market strategies, and the pressures of business growth. Isabella constantly and constructively questioned whether Ethan's solar energy projects genuinely benefited the local communities where they were installed, or if they simply transferred economic dependence from one energy source to another without providing genuine empowerment, local technical training, or lasting economic benefits for the people who lived in the areas where the systems were implemented. During their intense and transformative 5-year marriage, Isabella became not only his most important personal partner, but also his ethical business conscience and unofficial consultant on corporate social responsibility. She constantly encouraged him to consciously prioritize projects that truly transformed concrete human lives instead of simply generating maximum profits for shareholders, to extensively hire and train people from the communities where they installed energy systems, and above all, to maintain a genuine emotional connection with the transformative social purpose that had originally motivated his business career. Isabella also brought into Ethan's life a family he'd never imagined having or valuing. His father-in-law, Maestro Alfonso Herrera, a retired classical violinist who had dedicated literally his entire 4-decade professional career to high-quality chamber music and rigorous music education. Alfonso had been the first violinist of a nationally respected symphony orchestra for 40 consecutive years. A violin teacher to hundreds of talented students for 3 decades, and a composer of original musical pieces that were regularly performed in conservatories and concert halls throughout Latin America. Initially, Ethan felt genuine intimidation and social discomfort around his father-in-law. Alfonso represented a completely different cultural world from the results-oriented business. Pragmatism that dominated all aspects of Ethan's professional and personal life, pure art for art's sake, absolute dedication to aesthetic beauty instead of functional efficiency, a deep appreciation of cultural tradition and intellectual refinement that transcended immediate economic considerations. Ethan embarrassingly knew little about classical music, art history, or highbrow culture in general, and often felt socially inadequate and intellectually limited during early family conversations when Alfonso and Isabella naturally discussed specific composers, particular musical interpretations, memorable performances they had witnessed, or technical nuances of musical execution that were completely incomprehensible to Ethan. However, as the years passed and Ethan spent more genuine time with Alfonso, he developed not only sincere admiration for his father-in-law, but also a gradual understanding that there were fascinating and surprising parallels between classical music and precision engineering. Both disciplines demanded absolute technical precision, careful harmony between different and complementary components, and above all, the ability to create something significantly greater and more beautiful than the simple sum of its individual parts. Alfonso, in turn, became genuinely interested and impressed with Ethan's renewable energy projects when he finally understood how well-designed and implemented solar systems could literally transform entire rural communities. including many regions where his own former music students had grown up in poverty and without reliable access to electricity that would allow them to properly study music during nights and weekends. They progressively developed an authentic friendship based on deep mutual respect for exceptional dedication and the pursuit of excellence in completely different but equally demanding professional fields. Alfonso frequently visited Ethan and Isabella, especially after officially retiring and having significantly more time and flexibility available to cultivate important family relationships. These regular visits became special and valuable periods where Ethan could genuinely slow down his frantic routine and appreciate important aspects of life that he normally completely neglected. Long and reflective conversations about art, meaning, purpose, and legacy. Live classical music played especially for him and Isabella in the intimacy of their own home, and above all, the enriching experience of having a present, interested and genuinely invested father figure in his personal life and emotional well-being. Alfonso had gradually become the father figure Ethan had never had the proper opportunity to know or develop a close relationship with. His own father had worked so intensely to support the family that there was rarely time available for deep conversations, meaningful shared activities, or the transmission of personal wisdom between generations. Alfonso offered valuable perspectives on life, existential purpose, and personal legacy that perfectly complemented Ethan's intense professional ambitions with practical wisdom about what truly remains important and significant as we age and gain perspective on mortality. The devastating tragedy that would completely and permanently change the dynamics of the entire family happened on a seemingly normal and uneventful Tuesday morning. Alfonso was calmly preparing breakfast in his family kitchen when he suffered a massive and unexpected stroke that left him instantly and permanently paralyzed from the waist down, with severely limited mobility also in his arms and hands, which were absolutely essential to his identity as a professional violinist. The city's best neurologists, immediately consulted by Ethan, delicately but brutally clearly explained that although Alfonso's cognitive functions remained completely intact, and he retained all his intelligence, memory, and personality, he would probably never walk independently again and would have permanent and significant difficulties using his hands with the delicate muscle precision and fine motor control that were absolutely necessary to play the violin at a professional or even competent amateur level. For a man who had literally dedicated his entire conscious adult life to music as artistic expression, profession, and above all, fundamental personal identity, this loss represented far more than just an inconvenient physical limitation. The violin had been his emotional voice, his primary form of artistic expression and spiritual communication, his deepest professional and personal identity, and above all, his daily connection to beauty, transcendence, and existential purpose that gave meaning to every day of his life. Alfonso quickly entered a deep and seemingly intractable depression that intensely worried both Ethan and Isabella. He completely refused to participate in activities that had previously brought him genuine joy. Rejected visits from former musician colleagues and former students who wanted to express support and affection, and gradually isolated himself emotionally even from Ethan and Isabella, the people he loved most and who were most determined to help him during this devastating period of adjustment. Ethan reacted to the challenge of Alfonso's recovery in the only way he really knew how, and that had worked to solve all the other complex problems he had faced during his business career, by applying massive financial resources and cutting-edge technology to the medical problem with the same systematic methodicalness and obsessive determination that he applied to complex business challenges. Ethan immediately assembled a top-tier team of neuro-rehabilitation specialists, the best in the region. He installed state-of-the-art medical equipment in Alfonso's home, equipment costing tens of thousands of dollars. He relentlessly researched experimental assistive technologies and innovative treatments, anything that might allow Alfonso to play the violin again, even in a modified way. Ethan established a comprehensive recovery program, daily physical therapy sessions, specialized occupational therapy, regular medical evaluations with the leading experts. Everything available. Ethan was absolutely determined. He would use his wealth, his business and medical connections, his proven persistence to find technological or medical solutions to restore at least some of Alfonso's musical abilities, and more importantly, his sense of purpose, his personal identity, so devastatingly impacted by the stroke. During this intense focus on Alfonso's physical recovery, Isabella found herself inevitably torn between the emotional support her father needed and her demanding professional responsibilities that couldn't simply be cancelled or postponed indefinitely. She significantly reduced her professional travel and international commitments to be more present during his recovery. But crucial legal cases were ongoing, cases affecting thousands of people, entire communities who depended on her specialized advocacy, and most crucially, an absolutely pivotal case involving fundamental water access rights was being heard before the International Court of Justice, a case with the potential to set major legal precedents for global environmental protection. It was within this complex and emotionally charged family context that Isabella Montenegro entered the lives of the family. At 35, she had been a specialized housekeeper and caregiver for 15 years, building an impeccable reputation for technical competence, complete discretion, and above all, exceptional empathy with families facing medical challenges and difficult health-related transitions. Isabella consciously specialized in homes where elderly people or individuals with special needs related to physical limitations or chronic medical conditions lived. Her approach was holistic, recognizing that home care in such situations involved much more than just cleaning and organization. It required emotional sensitivity, extraordinary patience, and the ability to create home environments that were functional, safe, and most importantly, welcoming for people dealing with significant physical challenges. What neither Ethan nor Isabella knew about Isabella, and what would prove absolutely transformative for the entire family situation, was that she carried a deep and painful musical secret, a secret that had completely shaped her life's trajectory for the past 15 years. During her adolescence and early adulthood, Isabella had been an extraordinarily promising violinist, studying rigorously at a local conservatory on a full scholarship, a scholarship earned through exceptional talent and unwavering dedication. Isabella had shown almost prodigious musical talent since childhood, winning regional competitions consecutively throughout her adolescence, receiving enthusiastic praise from experienced professors who saw in her the genuine potential to achieve professional levels of musical excellence. She consistently dreamed of a career as a professional violinist in symphony orchestras or as an internationally renowned soloist. She religiously practiced the violin 4 to 6 hours a day throughout her adolescence, sacrificing typical social activities for the time needed to develop the technical skills that musical excellence demands, demonstrating consistent progress that impressed both professors and fellow students. Isabella possessed not only exceptional technical skill, but also an intuitive musical sensitivity, a sensitivity that allowed for emotionally profound and artistically mature interpretations. interpretations rare in such young musicians. However, the devastating economic reality of her family forced a cruel choice between her musical dreams and basic family survival. When her parents lost their jobs simultaneously during a particularly severe regional economic crisis, Isabella found herself facing the impossible choice of continuing her musical studies or immediately working to help support her family, including younger siblings who depended entirely on her financial contribution. The decision was devastating, but inevitable. Isabella sold her violin, an instrument of exceptional quality that she had bought with carefully saved earnings from years of part-time work, to pay for basic family expenses such as rent, food, and medication for her mother, who had developed diabetes and needed regular medical treatment. She left the conservatory literally months before graduating and started working in domestic cleaning, a job that offered immediate income, flexible hours that allowed her to care for her younger siblings, and required no specific formal education or training period. For the 15 years following the sale of her violin, Isabella had gradually and deliberately distanced herself from classical music, considering it an emotional luxury she couldn't afford, and more importantly, a source of intense emotional pain she preferred to avoid completely. She occasionally listened to classical music on the radio or television, but never spoke about her musical past with clients, co-workers, or even close family members. She never allowed memories of her lost dreams to interfere with her ability to work efficiently and support her family. Music had become a private and deep emotional wound that Isabella carefully protected from any external interference. Curiosity, or especially any situation that might awaken longing or regret over choices she had been forced to make due to circumstances completely beyond her control. When the specialized domestic services agency specifically recommended Isabella to Ethan's family, she was hired with clearly defined responsibilities to assist with Alfonso's basic care and the general upkeep of the house where he was living during his recovery and physical adaptation. Ethan had established an extremely intensive and structured care program. It included daily physical therapy, specialized occupational therapy, regular sessions with psychologists specializing in adjustment to physical disabilities, and carefully structured activities to keep Alfonso mentally engaged and motivated during the long and often frustrating process of adapting to his new physical reality. Isabella started working 3 times a week. Her responsibilities included detailed cleaning and organization of the house, preparing nutritious meals specifically adapted to Alfonso's dietary needs and swallowing limitations, basic assistance with mobility and transfers when professional physical therapists weren't present, and most importantly, creating a home environment that was simultaneously functional for his medical needs and emotionally supportive for someone undergoing traumatic adjustment. Isabella quickly demonstrated exceptional technical competence and extraordinary emotional sensitivity, anticipating Alfonso's needs even before they were verbally expressed, intuitively adapting her work methods to minimize disruptions during periods when he was resting or receiving medical treatments, and most importantly, creating a home environment that was medically efficient but also preserved personal dignity and a sense of privacy. So important for people dealing with sudden physical dependence. What most profoundly impressed and concerned Isabella during her first weeks working for the family was observing Alfonso's devastating sadness and seemingly intractable depression. She had worked with many people facing significant physical limitations during her career as a caregiver, but she had rarely seen someone so visibly and deeply devastated by the loss of specific abilities. a loss that transcended physical inconvenience and clearly represented a loss of fundamental personal identity. Alfonso frequently spent hours silently gazing at the violin that remained in its case on the grand piano, as if it were a cruel and constant reminder of everything he had lost and could never recover. Isabella observed how he reacted to the sound of classical music playing casually on the radio or television, a visible mixture of painful nostalgia, deep longing, and almost unbearable sadness, clearly suggesting that music was still absolutely fundamental to who he was as a new person, even if he could no longer actively participate in it as a performer. During casual conversations that happened naturally while Isabella performed her household tasks, she gradually discovered that Alfonso had been not only a high-level professional violinist, but also a dedicated teacher who had profoundly impacted hundreds of young lives through rigorous musical education and artistic mentorship. He spoke with evident passion and genuine pride about former students who had become respected professional musicians, about the fundamental importance of music in character building and personal discipline, and most importantly, about how music could communicate complex emotions and spiritual experiences that words simply couldn't adequately express. It was during one of these progressively more intimate conversations that Alfonso casually mentioned, but with palpable sadness, how much he missed not only actively playing the violin, but, most importantly, simply listening to classical music performed live by someone who truly understood the emotional soul and artistic depth behind the technical notes. He explained that recordings, however good they were in terms of technical reproduction quality, simply couldn't replace or replicate the transformative experience of witnessing music being created in real time by a performer who put genuine emotion, personal experience, and most importantly, human soul into every musical phrase. Isabella was deeply and unexpectedly touched by this seemingly casual observation, and began to seriously consider whether she could offer something valuable that all the expensive medical treatments, specialized physical therapists, and sophisticated equipment that Ethan had provided weren't managing to provide. The experience of live music played specifically for Alfonso by someone who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of musical performance, recognizing his spiritual needs as much as his physical limitations. Isabella's decision to reveal her musical past and offer her skills as a form of unconventional therapy was extremely difficult and emotionally risky. She had carefully protected her musical memories for 15 years, avoiding situations that could evoke longing or regret over sacrificed dreams, and most importantly, avoiding any activity that could painfully remind her of everything she had lost when she was forced to choose between music and family survival. However, observing Alfonso's deep depression daily and understanding that his sadness was fundamentally related to the loss of connection with the music that had defined his identity for decades, Isabella began to consider that perhaps her own musical sacrifice could finally have a greater and more significant purpose than simply supporting her family. Perhaps she could use her skills to offer something that money couldn't buy: Alfonso's genuine reconnection with the art that had given meaning to his life. After weeks of careful consideration and emotional preparation, Isabella made a courageous decision that would change not only Alfonso's life, but also her own relationship with music and, most importantly, with the sense of loss she had carried for 15 years. She decided to discreetly acquire a reasonably good used violin, using her carefully saved personal savings, and begin to play softly for Alfonso during periods when he was particularly depressed or agitated. Initially, Isabella only played when she was sure that Ethan and Isabella weren't present, not because she was doing something wrong, but because she didn't want to create expectations or misunderstandings about the scope of her professional responsibilities. She considered this music as a natural extension of her holistic care, similar to how she had learned to adapt meals or organize furniture more functionally to Alfonso's specific needs. The effect of live music on Alfonso's disposition and mood was immediate and dramatically positive. When Isabella played pieces she knew Alfonso knew and appreciated, compositions by Bach, Mozart, Brahms, and other composers who had been central to his professional career, he showed signs of life and interest he hadn't exhibited since the stroke. His facial expressions became more animated. He occasionally moved his fingers as if mentally following along, and most importantly, he conversed with Isabella about the technical and interpretative aspects of the music, in ways that revealed his passion and knowledge remained completely intact. These impromptu musical sessions became progressively more frequent and longer as Isabella realized they were providing Alfonso with something no medical treatment had achieved: genuine reconnection with aspects of his identity that remained alive and vital despite the physical limitations imposed by the stroke. Alfonso began to make specific suggestions about pieces he wanted to hear, offered technical guidance on interpretation that demonstrated his musical expertise remained fully intact. And most importantly, he began to show a renewed interest in life that had been completely absent for months. Isabella also discovered that playing the violin again, after 15 years of abstinence, was awakening aspects of her own personality and identity that she had deliberately suppressed. While her technical skills were obviously limited due to the lack of regular practice, her musical sensitivity and interpretive ability remained surprisingly intact, and she found deep satisfaction in using her talents for therapeutic purposes instead of professional performance or career. For several weeks, these secret musical sessions continued without Ethan or Carmen's knowledge. Isabella had established a routine where she played for Alfonso in the afternoons when he was most alert and receptive, always making sure she wasn't interfering with scheduled medical treatments or visits from physical therapists. She had become extremely cautious about timing and discretion, not wanting her musical initiative to be interpreted as an overstepping of responsibilities or an inappropriate attempt to replace formal medical treatments. Alfonso, in turn, had begun to eagerly anticipate these musical sessions as the most meaningful moments of his weeks. He had specifically requested that Isabella play certain pieces that had been important during his career, offered constructive technical feedback that helped her improve her execution. And most importantly, he had begun to share stories about his own musical career and memories of important performances he had participated in over decades as a professional violinist. It was during one of these especially meaningful musical sessions that Ethan made a discovery that would completely change his understanding of care, of human value, and most importantly, about the limits of purely technical solutions to problems involving the human soul and deep spiritual needs. Ethan had decided to make an unscheduled visit to Alfonso one Friday afternoon, bringing reports on new rehabilitation equipment he had researched and wanting to discuss possibilities of experimental therapies that might be beneficial. When he arrived at the house, he heard the sound of a violin being played with evident skill and musical sensitivity that he immediately recognized as being significantly superior to any recording or background music he normally played for Alfonso. Curious about the origin of this live music, and initially assuming that perhaps Alfonso had hired a professional musician without mentioning it, Ethan cautiously approached the room where the sound was originating. What He discovered when he finally got a clear view of the situation was so surprising and emotionally impactful that it instantly changed his perspective on Isabella, on Alfonso, and most importantly, on the nature of healing and recovery. Isabella was sitting next to Alfonso's wheelchair, playing the violin with evident technique and, most importantly, with genuine emotion that completely transformed the atmosphere of the room. Alfonso was visibly more alert and animated than Ethan had seen since before the stroke, following each note with total attention and occasionally offering verbal suggestions on interpretation that Isabella received with obvious respect and immediately implemented in her performance. What most shocked Ethan was realizing that he was witnessing a form of therapy that completely transcended anything that financial resources could buy. Isabella wasn't just playing music for Alfonso. She was offering reconnection with fundamental aspects of his identity that all the expensive medical equipment and specialized treatments hadn't been able to restore. She was treating not only his physical body, but his soul and his sense of purpose as a musician and connoisseur of art. Ethan remained discreetly observing for more than 15 minutes, during which time he witnessed Alfonso demonstrating more life, interest, and most importantly joy than he had exhibited in all the months since the stroke. Isabella was offering something that was literally priceless, the use of her own personal talents for the direct benefit of someone she cared for, completely transcending conventional definitions of housework to provide holistic care that recognized complex human needs. When the music ended and Alfonso thanked Isabella with evident emotion in his voice, Ethan understood that he had discovered something fundamental about the limitations of purely technical approaches to human healing. Isabella had accomplished something that all his medical research, consultations with specialists, and sophisticated equipment had not achieved. She had found a way to reconnect Alfonso with essential aspects of who he had always been, offering a continuity of identity that transcended the physical limitations imposed by the stroke. Ethan decided to reveal his presence in a way that honored what he had witnessed, instead of creating embarrassment or defensiveness. He entered the room with an expression of genuine admiration and evident gratitude, immediately making it clear that he had been deeply moved by Isabella's dedication and the obvious results of her musical initiative. "Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I didn't know you played the violin. What you are doing for Alfonso is more valuable than any treatment I've been able to provide." The conversation that followed revealed not only Isabella's musical past and the sacrifices she'd made for her family, but most importantly, the philosophy of care she'd developed, a recognition that people facing physical limitations often need reconnection with aspects of their identity that remain intact, instead of an exclusive focus on lost capabilities or imposed limitations. Ethan, demonstrating more clarity and energy than he had shown in months, explained to Ethan how the music sessions with Isabella had restored his sense of purpose, and especially his connection to aspects of his personality that hadn't been affected by the stroke. "Ethan," he said, "Isabella gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The ability to be a musician even when I can't play." Ethan understood that he had witnessed something that would permanently change not only his approach to Alfonso's care, but his understanding of human value, talent, and especially the forms of wealth that don't appear on financial statements. Isabella had demonstrated that true care often involves offering our own most precious gifts for the benefit of others, and that genuine healing sometimes requires art, beauty, and reconnection with spiritual aspects of the human experience that technology alone cannot provide. From that transformative moment, the dynamics of the entire family changed fundamentally and lastingly. Ethan not only publicly recognized the extraordinary value of what Isabella was providing, but also took concrete steps to honor and support her unique contribution. He immediately redefined Isabella's official role from housekeeper to specialized music therapist, with a substantial salary increase that adequately reflected the real value of her holistic work. More importantly, Ethan established an educational fund so Isabella could formally resume her musical studies if she wished, offering resources for private lessons with renowned masters, access to professional quality instruments, and, most importantly, flexible time that would allow her to balance personal musical development with her therapeutic work with Alfonso. Isabella initially resisted these generous offers, explaining that her priority remained financial sustainability for her family, and that she didn't want to create expectations or obligations that could interfere with her ability to provide consistent care for Alfonso. However, Ethan and Carmen persisted in their offers, explaining that adequate recognition of her talents wasn't charity, but a fair investment in someone who was providing invaluable value to their family. Alfonso became the most enthusiastic advocate for Isabella's continued musical development. He personally offered to serve as her musical mentor, sharing decades of professional experience and technical knowledge that could significantly accelerate her artistic development. "Isabella," he said during one of their regular conversations, "though you have a gift that shouldn't be wasted, quality music like yours needs to be shared with the world, not just with me." During the following months, an extraordinary routine was established in Alfonso's house, combining physical recovery with artistic rebirth. Isabella continued to provide essential household care, but now dedicated 2 hours of each visit specifically to structured music sessions that benefited both Alfonso and her own development as a violinist. Alfonso, revitalized by having renewed purpose as a musical mentor, began to show physical improvements that surprised his doctors. His motivation to participate in physical therapy increased dramatically when he understood that regaining some fine motor control in his hands could eventually allow him to play the violin again, even if in an adapted way. He began practicing coordination exercises with a determination he hadn't shown since before the stroke. The music sessions between Isabella and Alfonso became progressively more sophisticated and collaborative. Alfonso taught advanced interpretation techniques, shared stories about great violinists he had personally known, and most importantly, helped Isabella develop her own unique interpretive style that combined solid technique with genuine emotional sensitivity. Isabella, in turn, discovered that teaching and sharing music with Alfonso was healing emotional wounds she had carried. For 15 years, she could finally use her musical talents for meaningful purpose without guilt or regret about past choices. Her music now had a clear therapeutic function that fully justified the time and energy invested, and most importantly, provided a deep satisfaction that had been absent from her life since she sold her first violin. Carmen, when she returned from her professional trips and discovered the transformations that had occurred during her absence, was deeply moved by how Isabella had accomplished something that months of expensive medical treatments had not achieved, reconnecting her father with genuine joy and a sense of purpose. She immediately supported all of Ethan's plans to recognize and develop Isabella's talents, and most importantly, offered her own legal expertise to help Isabella navigate issues related to labor rights and protections for specialized caregivers. Ethan began to reflect deeply on the broader lessons that the situation with Alfonso and Isabella had taught about leadership, human value, and social responsibility. He realized that his company, despite all its technological successes and positive social impact, might be missing opportunities to recognize and develop hidden talents among its own employees. Inspired by Isabella's example, Ethan implemented programs in his company to identify and support the special skills and interests of employees that could contribute to a richer organizational culture and more human and meaningful work environments. He established funds for continuing education, created opportunities for employees to share artistic talents or special skills, and most importantly, began to value contributions that transcended formal job descriptions. Isabella's case also inspired Ethan to think differently about the communities where his company installed solar energy systems. Ethan Maxwell began investigating how renewable energy projects could support not only basic electricity needs, but also cultural and artistic development in remote rural communities. Programs providing lighting for music schools, energy for cultural centers, and support for local artists became regular components of his company's sustainable development projects. Caleb, energized by his new role as a musical mentor and inspired by Isabella's dedication, began considering possibilities to expand educational impact beyond his individual relationship with her. He proposed the creation of a musical mentorship program where retired professional musicians could work with young talents facing economic barriers similar to those Isabella had experienced. Isabella became an unintentional but powerful advocate for the idea that artistic talents exist at all levels of society, and that they are frequently lost due to economic circumstances rather than a lack of skill or dedication. Her story inspired the creation of a scholarship fund specifically for young people from working-class families who demonstrated musical talent but lacked the resources to adequately develop their abilities. During the 2 years following Ethan's initial discovery of Isabella's musical abilities, the family developed regular traditions that celebrated music as a central element of their shared lives. Weekly dinners always included musical performances, whether Isabella playing for the family, Caleb offering impromptu masterclasses, or simply everyone listening to and discussing recordings of great performances that Caleb had collected over decades. Carmen began integrating music into her own professional life, discovering that many indigenous and rural communities she represented had rich musical traditions that were being lost due to economic pressures and cultural displacement. She began to include the protection of cultural heritage and support for local artists as components of her human rights legal cases. Ethan understood that he had learned a fundamental lesson about the difference between solving problems and nurturing human beings. Technology and financial resources could solve many practical problems, but authentic human connection, recognition of individual talents, and especially the creation of opportunities for people to express the deeper aspects of their identity were equally important for genuine well-being. Isabella continued working with Caleb, but now as an officially recognized music therapist instead of a housekeeper with hidden abilities. She developed innovative methods of using music to support the recovery of people with physical limitations, combining practical knowledge acquired through experience with Caleb with formal training in music therapy that Ethan had funded. Her work with Caleb became a model for similar programs in hospitals and rehabilitation centers, demonstrating how art and music could complement traditional medical treatments in ways that improved not only physical symptoms, but most importantly, the emotional and spiritual quality of life of patients facing difficult adaptations. Caleb partially regained the use of his hands through a combination of traditional physiotherapy and renewed motivation to be able to play the violin again. Although he never recovered enough dexterity for professional performance, he was able to play simple pieces that provided him with deep satisfaction and above all, a sense of continuity with his identity as a musician. The collaborative musical sessions between Caleb and Isabella evolved into regular performances for small groups of friends, family, and eventually for larger audiences at community centers and charity events. They became inspiring examples of how art could transcend physical limitations and socio-economic differences to create shared beauty and meaning. Ethan learned. The true leadership sometimes means recognizing that other people possess wisdom and skills that complement technical and financial resources. Isabella had taught the entire family that authentic healing often requires not only the treatment of symptoms, but most importantly, reconnection with fundamental aspects of identity and purpose that give meaning to life. Years later, when Ethan reflected on the moment he discovered Isabella playing the violin for Caleb, he recognized that revelation had marked the beginning of his more mature understanding of wealth, success, and above all, how true impact often results from the recognition and development of human potential that exists in unexpected places. Music had become a bridge, connecting different worlds: business and art, technology and humanity, financial resources and personal talents, demonstrating that more effective solutions to complex human challenges often emerge when different forms of knowledge and skill are combined with mutual respect and recognition of the intrinsic value of each individual contribution. Isabella never completely abandoned domestic work, but transformed her practice into a form of art that honored both the practical and spiritual needs of the people she cared for. She became an example of how it is possible to integrate personal talents with professional responsibilities in ways that enrich both caregivers and those being cared for. The violin that Isabella had sold 15 years earlier to support her family had been replaced not only by a better quality instrument, but most importantly, by the understanding that sacrifices made for family love can eventually find ways of redemption and purpose that transcend original losses, creating new meaning that honors both past choices and future possibilities. During the following years, the impact of Ethan's discovery of Isabella's musical talents continued to expand in concentric circles that eventually affected hundreds of lives in unexpected and profoundly meaningful ways. What had begun as a private domestic situation, medical care for Caleb after his stroke, had evolved into a broader movement of recognition and development of hidden talents in working-class communities. Ethan meticulously documented the extraordinary results music had yielded in Alfonso's recovery, creating detailed case studies. He shared these with medical professionals, music therapy researchers, and most importantly, hospital and rehabilitation center administrators who could implement similar programs for other patients facing comparable challenges. The data was stunning and statistically significant. Alfonso had demonstrated measurable improvements, not only in mood and motivation, but also in objective physical indicators: greater participation in physiotherapy, improved fine motor coordination, a reduction in depression medication, and most importantly, the partial recovery of functions that doctors had considered permanently lost. Music had acted as a catalyst for healing that transcended anything purely medical treatments had achieved. Isabella unwittingly became a pioneer in the development of music therapy protocols, specifically for patients with motor limitations resulting from stroke. She worked collaboratively with neurologists, physical therapists, and academic researchers to codify methods she had developed intuitively through her experience with Alfonso, creating replicable frameworks that other music therapists could adapt to similar situations. Her unique approach combined musical technical excellence with an empathetic understanding of the psychological impact of sudden physical limitations. Isabella didn't just play music for patients. She engaged them as active collaborators, soliciting preferences, encouraging vocal participation even when instrument manipulation wasn't possible, and most importantly, treating each person as an individual with a rich musical history and specific personal preferences. Alfonso, energized by his role as a mentor and consultant in the development of these new therapeutic protocols, began writing a book on music therapy for neurological recovery, combining his personal experience as a patient with decades of professional musical expertise. The book would become a fundamental resource for families facing similar situations, offering both medical and artistic perspectives on how music could facilitate adaptation to physical limitations. Ethan significantly expanded the scope of his company's social responsibility, establishing formal partnerships with music conservatories, art schools, and community programs that identified and supported young talent from working-class families. The Isabella Fund, as it came to be known, provided full scholarships, access to quality instruments, and most importantly, personalized mentorship for students who demonstrated exceptional musical talent but faced economic barriers. Isabella integrated music and art as central components of her human rights legal cases, consistently arguing that access to cultural expression was a fundamental human right that should be legally protected. She developed important legal precedents establishing that communities had the right to preserve and develop artistic traditions as part of their cultural identity, and that economic development could not legitimately eliminate local cultural heritage. The musical mentorship program that Alfonso had proposed expanded into a national network of retired professional musicians who volunteered their time working with young talents. The program not only provided high-quality musical instruction, but also offered career models and guidance on navigating the music industry as a sustainable profession, especially for people from modest economic backgrounds. Isabella developed a specific curriculum for training other music therapists, teaching not only musical techniques, but most importantly, the cultural and emotional sensitivity needed to work effectively with people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. She emphasized the importance of recognizing that each person carries a unique musical history, regardless of formal education or financial resources, and that effective music therapy requires genuine respect for individual experiences and preferences. During this period, Alfonso regained sufficient use of his hands to begin playing the violin again, albeit in an adapted way that accommodated his permanent motor limitations. He developed specialized techniques for musicians with similar physical disabilities, creating musical arrangements that could be performed with modified movements, and most importantly, provided genuine artistic satisfaction despite the necessary adaptations. The collaborative performances between Alfonso and Isabella evolved into regular concerts in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and community events that raised funds for music therapy programs. Their performances became powerful demonstrations of how art could transcend physical limitations and create beauty that inspired both performers and audiences, proving that quality music could emerge from seemingly limiting circumstances. Ethan learned fundamental lessons about leadership that he applied not only to his personal life, but also to the management of his company and relationships with the communities where he implemented renewable energy projects. He understood that true sustainability required not only clean technology, but also the recognition and development of local human capacities that would allow communities to thrive in ways that honored both economic needs and cultural identity. Isabella never completely abandoned her domestic duties, but transformed her professional practice into a form of holistic art that integrated practical needs with the spiritual and emotional needs of the people she cared for. She became a model for a new generation of caregivers who understood that authentic healing often requires attention to human dimensions that transcend medical symptoms or physical limitations. The violin that Isabella had sold 15 years earlier had been replaced not only by a superior instrument, but by a profound understanding that sacrifices made for love and family needs could eventually find ways of redemption that honored both losses and future possibilities. Her story became a testament to the fact that genuine talents rarely die completely, but may remain dormant until they find a purpose and context that allow for renewed flourishing. Music had become a universal language that connected people across socio-economic differences, physical limitations, and most importantly, cultural barriers that often prevent the mutual recognition of shared human value. Ethan, Alfonso, Isabella, and Clara discovered that when authentic art meets genuine need, the results transcend anything financial resources or technology alone could achieve. Years later, when visitors asked Ethan about the beginning of his interest in music, therapy and community talent development, he always told the story of how he'd caught his cleaning lady playing the violin for his wheelchair-bound father-in-law, and how that moment had transformed his understanding of wealth, value, and especially the deeper forms of impact that emerge when we recognize and celebrate the human potential that exists in unexpected places, waiting only for opportunity and acknowledgement to flourish. It was a powerful moment, a turning point. He saw something extraordinary in that simple act, a spark of resilience, a testament to the human spirit. It wasn't about money, it was about connection, about seeing the inherent worth in every individual. This realization became the foundation of his work, the driving force behind his commitment to fostering talent and healing through music in underserved communities. He understood, deeply understood, that true wealth lies not in monetary gain, but in the growth and empowerment of others, and that was a treasure beyond measure. It shifted his perspective completely. He began to see the world through a different lens, a lens focused on potential, on possibility, on the transformative power of human connection. And this new vision, this profound shift in perspective, ultimately shaped the trajectory of his entire life's work. It was a journey of discovery, a testament to the power of observation, and the profound impact of recognizing the hidden talents and potential that reside within each of us. It was a lesson he never forgot, a lesson that shaped his life and the lives of countless others, a lesson that continues to resonate. It was a story of unexpected inspiration, of hidden potential, and of the profound power of human connection to heal and transform lives. It's a story that reminds us all to look closer, to see the beauty and potential in the unexpected places, to listen to the silent melodies waiting to be played, and to remember that true wealth is found not in money, but in the flourishing of the human spirit.